Hi ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chef Andy and you're tuned into yet another show of Dinner Guide. On this beautiful season today we are going to be doing a very beautiful dish. We're going to be making a meat pie from scratch. Without further ado, I'm just going to introduce some of the ingredients we're going to be working with today just to give you an idea of what exactly goes into a meat pie. So I'm just going to start off from this end. Here I have some tomato puree, just regular tomatoes blended in a blender. Some cubed green pepper. I've got some beautiful cheddar cheese. I've got some minced beef. I've got a sprig of rosemary and some sage. Then I've got some olive oil, some soy sauce, some tomato paste and some dried parsley. I've also got some chopped ginger there, some salt, some pepper, some coriander and some parsley, some stock, some red onions and some eggs. And last but not least, this beautiful round piece of short crust pastry. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into a short commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to go straight into making this beautiful dish. So take this time to grab your pens and your pieces of paper or your notebooks, and when we come back, we're just going to go straight into it. See you in a short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those who missed out the introduction to the show, my name is Chef Andy and you're watching Dinner Guide. We are just about to jump into the process of making a beautiful meat dish. We're going to be making a beef pie. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn up my heat. So I've got a thick base pot going on the side there, definitely non-stick. Onto that, I'm just going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and then we're just gonna give that a few seconds, and then we're just going to go in with our meat. We're gonna go in also with some ginger, some onions, some peppers, and last but not least, we're gonna be finishing off with some stock that we made earlier, some beef stock, some tomato paste, and then we're just gonna jump into the assembly of the pie. Right, so I'm just going to start with the meat. So that goes straight in there. I'm just gonna grab a wooden spoon. So I'm just gonna use my spoon to break up the chunk. Right, some nice browning going on there. Right, so we're just going to cook the meat now. We're just going to brown it. We're going to cook that for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're just going to incorporate the onions, the peppers, the ginger, and some soy sauce. I'm just going to give that a quick mix. Right, so remember, for this process, we're looking for a nice, juicy filling for our pies. So I'm not going to necessarily cook this until it's very, very dry. Just gonna give that a few mixes. So basically what you want to do is keep cooking this at high heat just until you don't notice any more splinters of red in your pot. So the best way I achieve that is basically by frying and mixing continuously. Remember, this allows your meat to brown more evenly and to also allow your meat to cook through as fast as possible. All right, so meat is nice, beautifully brown now. So I'm just going to go in with my red onions. Then I'm gonna go in with some green peppers. Last but not least, some ginger. Right, we're just going to keep mixing that as we continue with the cooking process. So nice, beautiful colors coming through there. Right, so nice, beautiful mixture going there. To that, I'm just going to add about 1.5 tablespoons of light soy sauce. And I'm just gonna keep mixing that as we continue. So I'm just going to give that about 2 to 3 minutes to cook, just to allow the onions to sweat out. To that, we're now going to add in some tomato paste and the rest of our dried ingredients here and some fresh ingredients. So I'm just going to start with some rosemary here. So I'm just gonna pull that off its stem. Just gonna discard that extra bit there. And then I'm just going to grab some of my cilantro, my coriander, and then just roughly give that a chop. So very, very easy to find ingredients, stuff that you can be able to find at your local spice or herbs vendor, definitely in the market. And then I'm also gonna add in just a nice flower of parsley there. Also just roughly chop that, but try to get it as small as you possibly can. Last but not least, our sage, also fresh. And if you can't find the fresh one, you can always work with dried sage, also works just the same way. Right, easy peasy. That's all gonna go in the pot. And then we're gonna bring the heat to medium now and keep stirring. And then just to conclude that, we're going to add our tomato paste. So that's about 3/4 cup of tomato, or 2 juiced tomatoes or blitzed tomatoes. If you do have a juicer or a blender, just throw them in there. Right. Give that a nice, beautiful mix. For those who are watching from home, you can be able to see nice, beautiful colors there from our mince. Just gonna turn the heat up a little bit. Remember, we want the mixture to be a little dry. We don't want the juices to go soaking into our pastry. So just gonna take those aside. I'm just gonna add a bit of stock there. So remember, I'm adding my stock in small bits while cooking at high heat. This is just to allow the meat to really cook through, get those tomatoes to really juice and break up. And of course, just to give a nice consistency to our filling. So in this process, I'm actually using beef stock because first of all, it's a little more nutritious than adding any water. Second of all, it just gives that bit of a beefy flavor to our filling, which we're looking for. Remember, we're trying to conserve as much nutrient as we possibly can. One beautiful trick about working with stock is it actually gives a beautiful nourishment of flavors into your dish. All the nutrients that you get from all that bones and all those leftovers of meat that you boiled up, all that flavor actually constitutes into adding a bit more flavor to this dish. Right, so I'm just gonna keep mixing that at high heat. And we're just going to now jump into a short commercial break, and when we do come back, we'll have this ready. It's going to be cooled off. I'm just going to now show you the process of how to fill up your pie, and just the finishing stages of how to get it in the oven, how best to lay your sheet, how best to lay your baking sheet. And from there, we're just gonna go straight into plating, and then I'm just going to give you the last bits of the dish that you might have missed out in our beginning part of the show. See you in a short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those who missed out on what we were doing earlier, I'm just going to fill you in. For those who are still following, we're just about to finish off the final bits of putting our pie together. So for those who missed out, what we did earlier is we made some filling from some lean beef mince, which we're actually now going to use to fill our pastry. So I'm just going to start with the containers that we'll be using today. And I'll be working with this too. So all I'm going to do now is fill them up with some mince. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill them up about 2/3, and then I'm just going to press that mixture down. So from viewers at home, if you can't be able to see it, you can see the meat is still hot. It's not cooled off yet. But the trick to doing this is basically just to finish the dish in the oven. So remember, we are not going to bake it for too long. We're just going to cook the top, which is the pastry bit that we are going to be adding on top of this layer. So this will just be in the oven for about 2 to 3 minutes just to get some color, and then it comes right out. Okay, so I have the first one done. I'm just gonna do the same with the second. So remember to always work from the center going outwards. This allows you to get a little more of that filling to spread around first of all, and then just go around from the edges inwards while you're trying to compress the mixture together. Right, simple as that. I think we're just going to make the 2 for now. Just gonna put that mixture aside. And now all we're going to do is we're going to cover that with our pastry that we just cut out. So as you can see, the teardrop shapes. The way this was achieved, I basically used the same bowl. I just put it on top of the rolled out pastry and cut about, let's say about 1/4 centimeter extra on the side. That's just to allow it for shrinking when it goes into the oven. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of my cheese. I'm just gonna sprinkle that right on top like that. So just a technique you can be able to play around with at home. As I always insist, don't stick with the rules of the book. Always try to be a little more creative with your dishes, especially if you're doing it at home. And I'm also taking my time to show you different techniques of how to play around with items that you have at home. For instance, oven-proof dishes that will go into your oven easily. They'll allow you to actually portion your meal a little earlier in advance. Right, so just a nice, beautiful pastry there, as you can see. And all I'm going to do is give it a firm press with my fingers right around. Like that. Right, so basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to tuck the pastry as I go. This is just to make sure most of the meat filling is covered. And also it will just add to your presentation much later. Right, so easy as that. And we're going to do the same thing for the second one. So remember, for the pastry, you can always try and make your own from home. If you do not have time, or if you don't have the patience to, you can always just buy the convenient one at your regular supermarket. You should be able to find both short crust pastry and puff pastry. Okay, I'm just going to finish tucking that in now. Just going to go around from the point I started off, and I'm just gonna work my way back again. So remember to always take your time doing this, but don't take too long because your pastry is going to start melting away. All right, and last but not least, I have some egg here which I'm going to use for egg wash. So a lot of you who don't have or own brushes at home that can be able to do this a little better, I always like to work with some napkin or some serviette. Does the same trick as well. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to use it to break that yolk and get a nice mixture in there. And all I'm going to do is brush that on top like that. So as I said, easy finishing technique. This is both beautiful for visual purposes. When it comes out of the oven, it's just going to give it a nice golden brown finish. Right, just get a nice even covering of the egg mixture. Make sure you go right around the top completely, because remember, this is going to turn colors in the oven. It's going to give your pie that nice beautiful golden finish, beautiful for presentation as well. All right, so easy as that. And just one more reminder, when you're working with pastry and it's going in the oven, always put an indentation right in the middle of it, just to allow for your pastry not to really puff up from all that excess steam that's in there. And that also allows all that excess steam to escape without ruining the finish of your pastry. And then last but not least, I'm just going to sprinkle the remaining bit of my cheese. All right, and now that's about ready to go into the oven. So this is going into a preheated oven that's at about 200 degrees. I'm using the top element alone because the bottom is already cooked. And all I'm going to do is throw that in there. All right, so we're gonna give that about 10 to 12 minutes to just color at the top, and then we're just going to take it out. We're going to take another short commercial break, but don't touch that dial. Please don't move from your seat. This is going to be very quick. We're going to be back in a short while. See you in a little bit. Welcome back to Dinner Guide. For those who missed out on what we were doing before the break, we're now just about to show you what you've been missing out on. For those who are actually catching up with the show right now, for whatever reason, you basically have missed out on something simple to make, but you can still be able to follow this and be able to do it yourselves at home. So I'm just going to take this out. These have been now going for about 15 minutes. Just gonna take them out, set them aside. So while we took a break, I managed to do an extra 2 different technique of making the same pie. So what I'm about to explain to you now is something that works 2 ways. So this works in the advantage of those who might not be able to work with pastry wherever you are, and for those that have the equipment to do so, they can be able to do it a different style. So I'm going to start with these first 2. So I'm just going to move those onto the board. So basically the ones that I have on the board now, this is basically the same mixture that went into the 2 that are on my left, but this is a simpler way of making it. So this would be a dish that is referred to as a boboti. So that's a South African descent. But then on the other side, I have some cottage pies that definitely look like cottage pies. So this is a different technique of making the pie, but from a totally different continent. This is from the English side of the world. This is the South African way of doing it. So they might be able to skip on the filling, and they might be able to skip on the pastry on its own, but the filling is definitely much similar to what you've been able to see today. So the idea for doing this was basically to be able to show you 2 different ways of serving a beautiful dish from your beef mince. So this is just one that does not have the pastry casing that we have done on the other. But now straight on to this one's, which was the highlight for today. So this is basically one that is to die for. It's a beautiful pastry. As you can see, the pastry has really cooked. It's nice and golden brown. From the top you can see the cheese that has already melted on top. It's got a nice crispness to it. Digging into it right to the bottom, you get this beautiful saucy meat, and it actually makes a very beautiful dish for your dinner. So without further ado, I'm just going to show you some techniques to plate that. I'm just going to turn this around. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a technique or two on plating. Very simple one. So here I have some homemade barbecue sauce, which I'm just going to make some patterns with on the plate there. Right, so simply I'm just going to run my spoon right around it like that. Very easy technique. Then I'm just gonna play around with some of my parsley that's on my hands here. So remember the dish, as I would serve it, I would just plate it as it is on the plate. Remember, the dish actually works hand in hand, as it basically complements itself, because you've got that beautiful crust at the top which stands in for your starch, and then you've got the beautiful meaty dish at the bottom, which is basically your main filling. And I would basically serve that. I would recommend serving it with some dry red wine, or you can just have it as it is. You can also have maybe a salad to go with it. A salad is always a good option for such a dish. You can serve it with quite a few things actually. Some creamy mashed potatoes, maybe even some very, very, very fresh made pasta. It will still actually go well with the dish. So here I have some homemade mayonnaise, which I'm just going to finish off with. I'm just gonna pipe a couple of those onto the plate, and some on top like that. And then just to finish off, one last sprig of parsley. All right, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Easy, beautiful, quick, healthy, convenient dish that you can now be able to make yourselves at home. As I mentioned earlier, for the pastry itself, if you do not have the resources to make it yourself, you can buy it convenient, and if you don't have one, you can always do it as simple as the ones I've done second to the first that we did earlier. So from here, it's been a pleasure hosting you today. My name was Chef Andy. You have been tuned in to Dinner Guide on BrandPlus TV. I will ask that you do leave your comments, do leave your inquiries or your recommendations on our Facebook page. Follow us, like it, share it with friends. Tune in for yet another beautiful episode on the next show, where we'll be making some more interesting dishes that you can be able to make at home with the littlest of ease. From my end, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely night.